I'm excited to do this presentation today. So the cult of domesticity in America. Let's trace its legacy even further. So let's get into it. So the definition. Let's go over it once again. So I've known it as womanhood. It has been an ideology I have seen transformed and connected to the now ideology I know, the cult of domesticity. It's like in America it goes hand in hand. But I don't define womanhood in a bad sense. I just know this has affected how women operate and live, So I am a woman in America, a citizen. So women were diminished to their nature, and they were held to the value of their ability to produce children, complete daily chores, pretty much. At the start of things, it was a hierarchy between men and women. Men, fueled all that they did, and women stayed behind and worked in their house, in their husband's house. And women were defined by their moral virtues and their biological functions, and just seen inferior to men overall. Their emphasis was on purity before marriage. They had to be a virgin. Virginity was key, and still is, it's still a factor. And submissiveness in a long portion of our history, it has been a big thing. A woman has to submit and just be quiet. And domesticity was therefore set upon her there when she was quiet and in a house. And it was especially set upon white women, and it was just measured by her service. So it started with European settlers, where they thought a childless, aka manless woman would just go crazy. She would turn evil and be the downfall of everyone, aka society. What? The contrast reveals just that the cult of domesticity, if you look that at the native way of thinking, that native women held way more autonomy, and they worked, governed, and owned property in their own lives, here on native land. But European colonists saw them as uncivilized, using gender expectations, and just that was their reason. Hey, you don't think like me? I'm gonna colonize you. I'm gonna use violence. So, that was enforced by the Christian morality of things, and paired with it, I should say. And it was just justification. That was based on the thought that relationships were based on submission and on mutual obligation. Okay, not bad. But between child and parent, husband and wife, man and God, just as man submits himself to God, citizens submitted themselves to the state, and wife and children submitted to dad and husband. And that was the power that was ordained, upheld by law so far. For a very long time in our history, it has been upheld by law, and reinforced by church. Therefore, it is tradition, it is custom, and it was justification in religion itself. But of course, natives did not think that way. So expanding your thinking, you could see how colonization is wrong. Industrialization and the working woman. That seems a bit far. Oh, no. There it is. So, let's get into this. We evolved over time to have started working, and that work was factory work, but it was in feminine industries such as textiles and sewing, things that women were, already taught or demanded to have known. And their wages were low. Their jobs were so unsafe, aka the Triangle Waste Factory fires that happened, and those women that need to be honored and known about, they all died. So many women died. It was crazy. And it was just that risk for them, and eventually that risk had to end when they had to marry. It was expected, and that was their only option because their jobs had no upward mobility to climb a ladder of employment, of growth or independence. Forget about it. But still some downturns that it bound this thinking of they are so dainty, and women are dainty and can't be decisive, to have them doubt themselves to the point that they can't think that they can vote. And that happened during the rights movement. That's how the cult impacted them there, and it was upheld especially upon white women. So, but they entered journalism, they used fake names, and they got it done. They got their names done. Ellie Bly, she broke barriers and she created undercover journalism, aka like a spy, OG spy. Like, come on. Okay. And the new woman was eventually created. She was. It happened. It was gradual, but it was there. But she was shamed for the progress she had made. She was college educated and independent, but because she rejected marriage and motherhood, you don't belong. And therefore she didn't have, no one would hire such a woman when, you talk about your personal life a little bit, and people will judge you. Employers will judge, and they did at the time. A long time. 60s, 70s, 80s. Forget about it. It was raging. It was quite raging. Up until maybe early 2000s, I would say. Okay. And speaking of, 1950s was not great when men came home after war. They pushed women out of the progress they had made in the workforces that they took over back to their caves at home, and they were fed consumerism by glamorized house products and housework tutorials and all this to keep them satisfied, but they were not, of course. And they thought that marketing products to women as being empowering, and that would satisfy them. That was the game. And the suburbia / American dream was sold that it celebrated a housewife ideal, a young white middle class woman. And FBI and federal media even pushed it during the 50s and such. That, independent women were suspicious because of the Cold War. Even un-American. It started there and it just progressed like the rest of the century, honestly. So, yeah, housework became patriotic at the time. Wow. Clean for your husband. It'll make everyone proud. Housemakers were told they were defending democracy. Marriage and motherhood were the primary roles. Still. Come on. There we go. But here's the backlash of this fed fakeness to women. The feminine mystique identified how domestic ideals caused widespread depression amongst women at home. And it just sparked an outrage, pretty much, and feminism, caught on. Women started chatting amongst themselves. And it has to be recognized that Black women led the organized efforts, like the Montgomery bus boycott, but were pushed out of leadership roles, and people like Martin Luther King Jr. took the spotlight, rightfully so, because they were good people in terms of, wanting rights in a quite I'm trying to find the right words. Quite smart and tactile way, I'd say. He was a very good, interesting man, but he was not like a great person because he cheated on his wife. And in his personal life, that was okay. He's not greatly judged for that. He's looked at his social achievements, and yet these women were not even given the chance for recognition. So who does it benefit? The power is kept concentrated in the hands of half the population because it benefits men economically and politically when there is a hierarchy. The cult supports systemic inequality, and it restricts women's autonomy in education, property rights, and laws for generations. The cult echoes today, all these things. Wage gap is still a thing. Culture, laws, abortion laws are greatly a factor, and beauty standards. I've felt those. So, the pattern, the trap, sexism in history propels sexism in today's society. So, we have to track it, and we see how the pattern goes and what needs to change, how it affects our lives. Each time period recycled the cult of domesticity in new forms. So, policy, media, and progressive politics. Overall, the cult benefits the patriarchy, capitalism, and just keeping women controlled and unpaid. Knowing all this stuff challenges the hold of media for standards and all of this stuff they feed us. It lets us be more educated and honestly challenge traditional education. It lets us be, better vocal at work and more willing to take opportunities, I think. And yeah, law. We got it in the law books baby. Yeah. So yeah. This is my works cited. And thank you. I am really glad to have done this class. I feel like I learned a lot and I have applied a lot to my life, analyzed a lot of the material, and yeah, I've enjoyed taking this class. So thank you for your instruction, and I had a blast. I hope you have a great rest of your summer and great rest of your year. Have a good one. Thank you. Bye-bye.